that Alan Turing, for example, like we weren't taught that he was a gay man and that he was neutered. We weren't taught about that, and that he lost his job despite the fact that he arguably contributed towards saving the country in World War II. We don't learn these narratives, and actually, like as a gay boy growing up, I didn't identify. I identified with more effeminate kind of artsy subjects. But actually, had there been people like me, kind of in some way like me, in certain professions, I don't know. Maybe I'd be an IT expert now. Probably not. But I think it is all about role models. But it also comes down to the curriculum, because we're taught a very sterilised version of history that is through a very kind of white, male, straight, ableist-centric approach.
Thank you. Yes, I think one of the best days I had at NPL was a visit from the Brownies. And it was just these little balls of energy. It was sort of little minions just bouncing up and down. And they came to learn about making ice cream with liquid nitrogen and learn about women in science. And I thoroughly recommend sort of working with local schools and just and wheeling out some of your great female scientists like Helen, who can come and talk to girls and actually get those role models in, sub 10. Okay.
I have a question for Helen around dyslexia, and you mentioned, you described people with dyslexia as having untapped creative capability, were able to solve problems, and I really identified with the good procrastination bit. But I was just wondering whether those kind of characteristics are exactly what organisations that are reliant on people with STEM experience and education, we really rely on it. Is there a higher prevalence of people with dyslexia in organisations such as ours, do you think?
That's a really interesting question. Really interesting question. What we do see is that within certain sectors, employment sectors, we do see a higher proportion of dyslexic individuals if they make it that far. I mean, it's interesting to listen to the debates about gender and stuff within education, but for a lot of our dyslexic individuals and children in school, it's about opportunities. So if you are struggling to learn to read and write effectively, then basically what tends to happen is that you don't even get the opportunity to do all of this other stuff, because they're of the school of thought, well, you must learn to read and write properly before you do any of that other stuff, even though you may be thinking at a much higher level. So certainly I think in terms of your question, I think there is a huge pool of talent that never gets the opportunity to actually grow and develop and explore these areas, because if you haven't got your GCSE in English, as we all apparently know, your life is over. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other. So we are told. And for a lot of our individuals, that in itself is a huge barrier. I'm not saying they can't achieve it, but it becomes this huge barrier that prevents them progressing. So, and again, I'll use a personal example because he's mine and I own him. My youngest son, for example, is extremely good at maths, like ridiculously, obviously some sort of genetic throwback. But anyway, he's ridiculously good at maths. And when he went to secondary school, he'd been assessed for dyslexia. They said, oh my goodness, he's in the top 2% for innate mathematical ability for kids his age. And I was like, oh my God, the child's a genius. And so he went to secondary school, and I said, well, of course, he's going to be in the top set for maths because he's just a genius. And that wasn't me being an slightly biased mother. And he ended up in the bottom set for maths. And so I tackled this and said, so kind of what's going on here? Why is this, guy that's really good at maths, why is he in the bottom set for maths? I said, oh, well, he can't read the questions. And so clearly, because I'm a rational parent, I challenged this slightly and said, well, I think you might have made a bit of an error. and I suggest you reconsider your equality diversity policy and about access and disability, and had a little bit of a mumble on. And we really couldn't get beyond that, but he can't read the questions very well. And it would appear that all the support was targeted at those who were in the bottom sets, and there was very little for those who needed that bit more to be able to access, to progress with their career. And so for those individuals who, they almost don't even get the opportunity to explore those things that they are good at, because so much time is focused on the things that they're not good at. We spend extraordinary amounts of time trying to fix them. You can't read and write, so, okay, rather than giving you the tools you need to be able to do the job, we're going to just bang away and teach you more and more and more about how to spell said or whatever it is, instead of actually tapping into those talents. So when we talk about this grit and determination, for me, any dyslexic individual that kind of makes it through our mainstream education process, comes out vaguely undamaged, I take my hats off to them, because they have really fought the system, they really have. But in terms of going back to your original question, while I am on my soapbox, clearly, yes, we certainly see where they survive the education system, they do end up in sectors where that diversity, that creativity of thought is valued. So science, engineering, my son certainly found his niche, because he suddenly discovered that everybody at university that is in that sector is kind of the same as him, and spelling no longer matters. And in terms of architecture, yeah, that's another good one. And the creative arts, yeah, absolutely there. Anywhere that recognises the individuality and creativity of thought, and more importantly, creativity of thought process, we see this greater density. Administration, not so much.
One more question before lunch? Oh, we've got two here. Kind of two short questions then.
Thank you. It's Gwyn Morris from Public Health England. I just want to pick up on Ruth mentioned earlier around the whole area of social inclusion, and just reflecting on some of my daughter's experiences. She went to an inner London comprehensive, very respectful, caring, hugely diverse population of school students. And the only time she's felt really out of place is when she got a place doing natural sciences at a Russell Group University, where there's a high percentage of kids who feel entitled, who've been through a fee-paying school system, who have then got internships and everything else lined up for them. And this is the first time in her life she's experienced homophobia and racism from the other students as well. And you sort of pick up on conversations with other children that I know, and there's a similar sort of thing which is very excluding. And I just wonder where the schools are doing well, the universities themselves are doing well, but the student group who get in are maybe not the most diverse and welcoming. Just wonder what your views are.
Pete, okay.
I think this is a difficult question, because we're really talking about elitism in a broader sense, aren't we? And we're talking about the establishment and a kind of an elite class that does manage to get their children into unpaid, internships, and things like that after university. I think quite often, like the HE sector is tasked with widening access, so there are bodies who regulate this, I understand, but I don't think enough progress has been made fast enough, because if you look at kind of the most elite kind of institutions, typically kind of Russell Group, Red Brick, research intensive, they have been highly homogenous environments. And I remember going to Newcastle University, which is Russell Group. I didn't know that at the time. I applied there thinking it would be a pretty working class environment. I was from Hull originally, a comprehensive school, and I got there and I didn't relate to most people who were there, because I felt like being in coming from a comprehensive school, I felt like that was a very kind of like alienating environment in the halls that I was in, for example. So I think systematically, I think there needs to be more concessions made from people who aren't privately educated, for example. I think with additional tutors, I think it's probably quite easy to get the top grades at A levels, to get into the top universities. But I think there's many kids where the attainment of the schools are generally a lot lower, I think are really going to struggle. And I think especially in STEM subjects, I've got to say it, I think that really relies upon more than just good teaching, but also a culture of aspiration as well, which I think in a lot of comprehensive schools I don't think there is in STEM. And I think part of this does also relate to our identities, because we do see them kind of completely inundated with a similar kind of person, which is typically kind of white privileged male kind of elite. That's not really kind of any formed thought, I'm just rambling, but yes, I agree, it's a problem.
Could I just say two things? So we ran a project several years ago looking at trying to encourage the participation of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds in physics. Physics is a posh subject, partly because of the skills that it's taught in, the laboratory environment that you have to have, and certain skills are predisposed to the space and so on of having the kind of environment to teach physics well. And actually, the learning that came out of that project was it's about your numeracy and literary skills going into secondary school. Actually, it's not necessarily about how good you are at science. If you've got the underlying excellence in numeracy and literacy in order to be able to comprehend science, and that's what we need to tackle, is the people coming out of primary schools without the adequate numeracy and literacy in order to do a good job at scientific education. The other thing is just a little plug for Project Juno, because we have just introduced a new principle. It's based on 6 principles. Our 6th principle is all about professional conduct, and we're expecting physics departments to train both the staff and students about what is appropriate professional conduct, and that includes the environment, it includes harassment, it includes being a good scientist, and there's lots of things within that. So hopefully we can start to change any undercurrents of a misogynistic, homophobic culture in physics departments, at least through this encouragement to take part in Juno and to really start to address some of the student-on-student issues.
Sorry not to ask the whole panel, but we're just going to be a bit short. And Richard, there was one question at the back, and that's it. Sorry, James, I know that's not one, it's 3.
Change the subject area slightly. Having read your characteristics of dyslexic people and pros and cons, I find myself a complete mess in terms of, and as someone with a self-acknowledged intolerance of misspelt emails, leads me to the question of, what do you see as the scope for technology to be able to find aids for people with the sort of communication difficulties that we are sometimes seeing that get in the way of inclusion? So is there scope for digital technologies to help where there is difficulty at the moment with communication, where there is dyslexia or the other manifestations?
Thank you. I think actually you raised that in your presentation, or began to, didn't you?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, assistive technology is moving at such a pace. I mean, there are the very traditional, the sort of, well, I say they're traditional, they've been around forever now. The text reading software, which makes life so much easier. There's the voice recognition software, where people just talk what they want to say and it writes it up. Historically, things like voice recognition software were a pain because you had to train them and it took forever. My son has just got his new version of Dragon, and it literally took him 5 minutes, and now, he's sat there with his headphones on, muttering away to himself at the back of the room. But also there's a lot of stuff now that is inbuilt, and technology is moving on at such a fast pace. So, for example, a lot of the Microsoft stuff, your Windows actually, and Edge, has just so much stuff. I'm not a techie person, I promise you, but it has so much stuff, even the voice recognition that is inbuilt, the text reading stuff that is inbuilt is actually superb without having any add-ons. The problem that we encounter is that people don't know it's there, and quite often within an employment situation it's actually been disabled. Whereas actually that can make such a difference, not just to in terms of accessibility, but also in terms of speed and efficiency. So if it's going to take somebody, I don't know, half an hour to plough through a report that they've got to read, but they can sit there and listen to it in 10 minutes, purely from a business case, that makes so much more sense. And likewise with your voice recognition software, if it's going to take somebody hours to write the thing and they can just talk it into their computer and then walk away and it writes it up while they do something else. Assistive tech came from this sort of disability point of view, but actually, you know, it makes such good business sense. It is so much more cost effective. So a lot of the apps now do magic stuff. There's a pen. I have to share that. I say I'm not techie, so some of this, for me, enters the realms of Harry Potter. So there is a pen that you write stuff with in longhand, and it magically converts it to text on your screen and records it while you're doing it, and it completely freaks me out. But I want one.
Katie, would you like to comment on returning to work and the pace of change in technology and how, I mean, that is, you know, the rate of change is increasing. More daunting, perhaps?
It is daunting, certainly, but I think obviously the fellowships that we offer give people the chance to upskill, to relearn skills if they need to, certainly. But I think obviously thinking about that area, I think it's not just obviously our fellows. You know, often other people in the workplace can get left behind. It's like you know, others have said, but certainly if you are returning, it is a particular thing that people do worry about, that they aren't going to be up to date with everything. But certainly with support and with the fellowships we offer, then people certainly are up to date. One other thing that relates back to an earlier question or comment that somebody made, one of the things that we found and what we really try and encourage with our Daphne Jackson Fellows is that they actually get involved in speaking at seminars in departments, and actually we try and really raise their visibility, so that they're not just beavering away in the background and somebody knows that, well, yep, that person, they're part-time and they're doing something on a fellowship. We really try and boost their visibility within the department in which they're working, so that everybody is really clear that, you know, they're returning from a prolonged career break, that they are working part-time, but that they are working extremely hard. Their work, you know, part-time is quite acceptable. So I think, you know, for me, that raising the visibility of them within their workplace is really quite key, because then everybody knows that they're there on a Daphne Jackson Fellowship, and it's known to be a prestigious fellowship, and there aren't any problems with invisibility for the fellows.
Right. I think was there one more question at the back? I think that's, and then we can have lunch.
What's your individual or collective view on D&I quotas?
Yes. Okay, I'll just start by saying I prefer targets rather than quotas. I think if you set yourself a target and you try and aim for that, then actually if you know, make sure it's ambitious, you're not setting yourself a low target, but, you know, rather than actually, as Ruth said earlier, make sure there's women in the room just because there's a woman in the room. But actually, if you keep setting yourself ambitious targets to aim for, that would be my personal philosophy.
I'm just going to echo what Jenny said, and no, I don't agree with quotas. Again, targets much better. I mean, certainly I know a lot of people who said, I don't want to be, you know, on a committee, on a board, simply because there's a quota. So no, I don't agree with them at all. I just have to say, that's my personal opinion. So.
I mean, I think it's slightly different for sort of my sector in some ways. I think all that we would be looking for is an equal playing field, where there are not barriers placed in the way of somebody applying for a job in terms of the recruitment process or access to the information or demonstrating their skills, and that consideration is given to accessibility. And then once they are on that level playing field, that they are considered alongside anybody else on their individual merit.
Yeah, I guess our situation, our perspective is similar to that of Helen's, actually, although I absolutely agree with other panellists in that targets are definitely preferable to quotas. With LGBT people, I think sometimes the numbers are a bit smaller, and so you can't necessarily, kind of dictate that you'll have X, percentage or X number of a board or senior management team kind of like representing the LGBT community. But with organisations where there's literally no visibility of LGBT people at all in the organisation, we would say that that's a problem, because either they don't exist at those levels in the organisation, or they do exist but they're just like afraid or are wary of being open about their identities. So either way, we would say there needs to be some level of visibility, and we use this expression in Stone, which is that you can't be what you can't see. So if you can't see women on the board, what message does that send out to women about whether you can be on the board? If you can't see any LGBT senior leaders in the organisation, does that lead you to think that you can't be a senior leader if you are LGBT? So that people seeing themselves reflected is important.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Could we show our appreciation to the panel members? Thank you. That's brilliant. So we're going to take a break for lunch. If we could back at 1:30. 1:40. James has given you 10 more minutes. 1:40. And we're going to be looking at sharing best practice among us within RTOs and seeing what we could do in terms of making a possible action plan going forward, just to go back and start some work in our own organisations. Thank you very much. Thank you.